The package wasn't mine, but it had my address printed on it in bold letters. That's how it all started, on a Tuesday afternoon, with a cardboard box on my porch that didn't belong to me. I work from home most days, so I'm usually the one who intercepts the mail before it piles up. When I bent down to pick it up, I saw my brother's name across the top. Not unusual at first glance. Chris lived only 20 minutes away, and sometimes he shipped things here if he knew I'd be home to sign. Still, I hadn't heard from him in a while, so I texted, "Hey, package came for you at my place. Want me to drop it off?" No response. That silence sat heavier than it should have. Chris wasn't the best texter, but he never ignored me completely. We'd always had this unspoken rhythm. Me, the cautious, detail-oriented one. Him, the free spirit who drifted from one job or hobby to the next. If I reached out, he eventually circled back. This time, nothing. By the end of the day, I'd checked my phone more times than I'd like to admit. Curiosity got the better of me. I didn't open it, at least not right away. Instead, I moved the box inside, setting it on the kitchen counter where it stared at me like a dare. My accountant brain started running through scenarios. Maybe it was just some online order he forgot about. Maybe he'd used my address on purpose. But why not tell me? By Thursday, with no word from him, the weight of that package became ridiculous. I rationalized it every which way. What if it was perishable? What if it was important? And really, wasn't it my responsibility, since it was under my roof? I sliced the tape carefully, almost guilty, like I was peeling into someone's diary. Inside wasn't what I expected at all. Not clothes, not electronics, nothing ordinary. Instead, layered neatly, were envelopes, dozens of them, all addressed to different names I didn't recognize. But each one had my brother's return address printed on the corner. I just stood there, staring at them, the hum of my fridge filling the silence. Something about those envelopes told me I was holding a thread to a side of Chris I'd never been allowed to see, and I knew pulling on it would change things I couldn't undo. I didn't touch the envelopes at first. I just stared at them, half expecting them to explain themselves. Each was sealed, neat, and deliberate, like they weren't meant to be handled casually. My brother wasn't the most organized person in the world, so the precision alone threw me off. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about them. I kept replaying small things I'd brushed off before. Chris taking sudden phone calls and stepping outside, or the way he dodged questions about what exactly he was working on these days. He always framed it as consulting, but never with much detail. I figured he just didn't want to bore me. Now I wasn't so sure. On Friday, I finally called him, straight to voicemail. I left a message that was light on purpose. "Hey, got something of yours here. Call me back." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Normally, he would at least shoot back a quick, "Will do." Again, nothing. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe he was traveling. Maybe he was swamped. But the box on my counter made those excuses harder to swallow. I slid one envelope halfway out, just enough to see the name on it. Not mine. Not Chris's, not anyone in our family. Mark Hastings, a perfectly ordinary name. Another envelope said, Claire Ramirez. Different handwriting on the labels too, like someone had gone out of their way to make each one distinct. I put them back and closed the flaps, heart thudding in my ears. This wasn't about money or shady dealings. I knew Chris well enough to rule that out. But it also wasn't just a hobby project. Whatever it was, he'd gone to lengths to keep it off the radar. And if he had chosen my house as the safe address, that meant he trusted me not to question it. The problem was, I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. And when Saturday morning came with still no call, I knew I was past the point of leaving it alone. By Saturday afternoon, the box felt radioactive. Every time I passed the counter, I caught myself glancing at it, then forcing my eyes away like it wasn't quietly dismantling my peace of mind. I finally tucked it into the hall closet just so I could make coffee without feeling like it was staring back at me. But hiding it didn't erase the questions. Why all the names? Why send them from his address but deliver them to mine? And why keep me in the dark? I paced around my apartment, trying to line it up with the brother I knew, the guy who'd taught me how to ride a bike, who never remembered birthdays but always showed up for the important stuff. This careful, almost secretive version of him didn't match. By evening, my patience cracked. I pulled the box back out, opened it again, and picked one envelope. My hands hesitated, but logic won. If it was something benign, I'd be relieved. If it wasn't, I needed to know. I slid a finger under the seal and peeled it open slowly, like breaking a rule in slow motion. Inside was a handwritten letter, not typed, not printed. I skimmed the opening lines, and the words caught me. "Dear Mark, I know we haven't spoken in years, but there are things I should have said a long time ago." The rest unfolded like a confession mixed with a heartfelt apology. No mention of business, no favors asked, just raw, unpolished honesty. I set it down and grabbed another at random. Same thing, different name. A letter full of reflection, regret, and warmth. He wasn't scamming anyone. He wasn't in trouble with the law. He was writing to people from his past. Old friends, maybe old flames, people he felt he'd wronged or left behind. For a moment, I actually exhaled, relief washing over me. But then another thought landed harder. Why keep this secret from me? Why hide letters like they were contraband? And why send them through my address instead of his own? That detail stuck in my throat, because if Chris didn't want them tied back to him directly, it meant there was more here than just nostalgia. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured those envelopes stacked neatly in the box, like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't earned the right to solve. The words from the letter to Mark looped in my head. My brother, who rarely strung together more than a text saying, "All good," writing full pages of carefully chosen sentences. It didn't line up with the version of him I'd always known. By Sunday, I couldn't sit still. I drove over to his apartment in Decatur, a small one-bedroom near the park he liked to run in. His car was in the lot, which calmed me at first, but no one answered when I knocked. I stood there longer than I should have, knocking again, then calling out. Still nothing. A neighbor poked her head out and said she hadn't seen him in a few days. That only deepened the knot in my stomach. I left without making a scene, but the ride home was restless. My mind kept returning to the letters. They weren't just sentimental, they were confessions. And while none of them pointed to anything criminal, they carried the weight of someone trying to settle accounts with people, with himself. I wondered if he was sick, or if he knew something I didn't. The idea scared me more than I wanted to admit. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with one of the envelopes in front of me. I didn't open it this time. I just stared at the name written in Chris's neat handwriting. Claire Ramirez. I didn't know who she was, but the way he wrote her name had a kind of care to it. I caught myself wondering how many other Claires or Marks had quietly shaped parts of his life I'd never heard about. It's a strange feeling, realizing your own brother might be a stranger in ways that matter. I kept telling myself I had two choices: seal everything back up and hand it over untouched, or keep pulling the thread and risk unraveling things he clearly didn't want seen. I wish I could say I left it alone, but the truth is, by then, I already knew I wouldn't. Monday morning, I carried the box into my home office and set it on the desk like it was part of my workload. I told myself I'd only look closer, not interfere. That was the accountant in me, curious about details, unable to leave numbers unbalanced or a story half-finished. I went through the stack slowly, one envelope at a time, checking the names, jotting them down on a legal pad. A pattern started forming. Some of the names were vaguely familiar, like people I'd heard in passing when Chris told old college stories. Others were complete strangers. The return address on each one was his apartment, never mine. So why ship them here? That part stayed a riddle. I opened two more letters. Both followed the same style. Apologies, reflections, memories written out in a voice I barely recognized. Chris wasn't just reminiscing, he was taking ownership, like he was writing closing chapters for people he'd left behind. I thought about what kind of weight he must have been carrying to sit down and write dozens of these, one by one. Still no call back. I checked his social media, silent for over a week. That wasn't normal. Even when he disappeared into some new project, he always posted about a band he liked or a hiking trail he'd found. Now nothing. The idea that he might be planning to vanish, whether for a while or for good, hit me harder than I expected. And I couldn't tell if these letters were meant to reassure the people in his past, or if they were a way to prepare for an exit. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the list of names I'd written down. Each one represented a piece of my brother I'd never been allowed to see, and for the first time in my life, I wondered if I even knew him at all. That's when I decided I wasn't going to sit here waiting anymore. If he wouldn't call me back, I'd track down one of the names myself. I picked Claire Ramirez first. Something about the way her name looked in Chris's handwriting kept nagging at me. After a bit of searching online, I found a profile that seemed to match. Atlanta area, around his age, a high school teacher. I hesitated. What was I even planning to say? "Hi, I'm Chris's brother. I accidentally opened your private letter." It felt invasive, but the longer I stared at her picture, the more convinced I became that she might hold a clue about what Chris was doing. I sent a polite, cautious message. Hi Claire, my name is Daniel. I think we might have a mutual connection, Chris. Are you available to chat? I didn't expect much, but to my surprise, she replied within the hour. Sure. Is he okay? That question alone made my pulse spike. Why ask that? Unless she knew something I didn't. We agreed to meet for coffee the next afternoon at a cafe near her school. I almost canceled 3 times, but curiosity outweighed my nerves. When I showed up, Claire recognized me immediately. You look just like him, she said, almost kindly, almost accusing. She didn't waste time with small talk. So you don't know? She asked, eyes narrowing. I shook my head, unsure how much to admit. I found something that suggests he's been reaching out to people from his past. Letters, yours included. She looked down at her cup, stirring it even though it was already mixed. That sounds like Chris, she said softly. Always too late with the important things. I pressed gently. What do you mean by that? She gave me a long look, weighing her words. Your brother's been carrying regrets for years. Some of us thought he'd finally started making peace with them. If he's sending letters, maybe he's trying to make amends before something changes. I left the cafe more unsettled than before. Whatever this was, Claire clearly believed it meant something bigger. And now I couldn't shake the fear that Chris wasn't just reconnecting. He was preparing for some kind of goodbye. Driving home from that cafe, I kept hearing Claire's words on repeat. Before something changes, she had said it with this finality, like she knew what I didn't. I tried not to let my mind spiral, but the thought of Chris preparing to leave everything behind gnawed at me. That night, I pulled the box out again. I lined the envelopes across the table, each name a doorway into some version of my brother's life I had never been invited into. Some were college friends I vaguely remembered, others total mysteries. I opened another letter, this one to someone named David Chu. Same theme, reflection, regret, a hint of apology. It wasn't melodramatic, just earnest. The kind of honesty you usually only spill out when you think there won't be another chance. I didn't want to snoop further, but every page I read drew me closer to an unavoidable truth. Chris was working through a ledger of unfinished business, and he didn't want anyone, especially me, to interfere. Still, I couldn't shake the practical question. Why mail them from my address? If the intention was sincerity, why not his own? The accountant in me hated the loose ends. It felt deliberate, almost protective, like he wanted a layer between himself and the recipient. By Tuesday, I was restless enough to drive by his apartment again. His car was still parked in the same spot. I knocked, waited, then finally sat on the curb outside like some kid waiting for their parent to come home. After 20 minutes, I admitted to myself he wasn't in there. Back at my place, I stared at the list of names I'd written. Claire had given me one piece of the puzzle, but not the whole picture. I decided to try another name, this time someone who wouldn't be tied to old heartbreak. Maybe then I'd understand whether Chris's double life was really just a hidden side he never let family see. The name I circled was David, and the next day, I was going to find him. Finding David Chu wasn't hard. A quick search brought up a small design firm he co-owned in Midtown. I called the office, half expecting to be brushed off, but when I mentioned Chris's name, the receptionist paused and then said, "One moment." A minute later, a man's voice came on the line. "This is David." I introduced myself, explained that I was Chris's brother, and there was a long silence on the other end. Finally, he said, "Is he okay?" That same question again. Always that question. We agreed to meet for lunch near his office. David turned out to be a tall, calm guy in his 40s who gave off the impression of someone who noticed more than he said. After a little small talk, he leaned in and asked, "So what's going on with him?" I hesitated but decided honesty was my best shot. I found some letters he wrote. One of them was to you. They ended up at my place. I don't know why. David let out a slow breath, almost a laugh without humor. That sounds like Chris. Disappears for years, then pops up with a letter like he's narrating a movie ending. He took a sip of water before continuing. Back in the day, he and I were close. He pulled away after a falling out we never really patched up. The letter he sent, I haven't opened it yet, but I can guess what's inside. I asked, "Did he ever mention family when you knew him?" David shook his head. "Not much. He kept you all at a distance. Said you wouldn't understand the choices he made. Honestly, I thought that was just him being dramatic. But now, I don't know." Walking back to my car afterward, I felt more conflicted than before. Two different people, Claire and David, both seemed to see sides of Chris I'd never even glimpsed. To them, his letters weren't a shock. They were the inevitable return of someone who'd been carrying a weight for too long. The strange part was, neither of them seemed angry. If anything, they looked at me like I should already know the reason he was writing, like I was the only one still in the dark. By the time I got home, I felt like I was chasing shadows. Everyone I spoke to seemed to understand my brother better than I did. Claire with her quiet sadness, David with his resigned acceptance. They both acted like Chris's pattern of disappearing and resurfacing was just who he was. To me, it was brand new. That evening, I sat with the box again, running my hand over the envelopes like they might suddenly give me answers. I noticed something I'd overlooked before. The stamps weren't canceled. None of these letters had been mailed. He'd addressed them, sealed them, but never sent them out. The realization hit me harder than I expected. Chris hadn't chosen my address as a shield. He'd chosen it as storage, a place where the letters could exist without actually reaching anyone, like he wanted them written, but not delivered. That changed everything. Why write dozens of apologies and reflections only to lock them away? Was he planning to send them all at once? Or was writing them the whole point? His own way of unloading the past without actually reopening it. The next day, I drove back to his apartment one more time. His car was gone. No sign of him. No answer at the door. I tried calling again, straight to voicemail. For the first time, I let the thought in, maybe he didn't want to be found. On the drive back, Atlanta's traffic buzzing around me, I felt the mix of worry and reluctant respect tangling together. If these letters were his way of processing something private, then maybe digging further was less about helping him and more about easing my own discomfort. Still, I couldn't shake one truth. By leaving the box at my house, whether by accident or by design, Chris had let me see a part of him he'd hidden from everyone else. And now it was my decision what to do with it. The box sat in my living room for another week before I made a choice. Every day I thought about mailing the letters myself, slipping them into the system so they would finally reach the people he had written to. But the more I imagined their faces reading words Chris hadn't chosen to send, the more wrong it felt. They weren't mine to deliver. Instead, I packed the box back up and taped it shut. I drove it to his apartment and left it inside his doorframe, hoping he'd see it the moment he returned. I didn't add a note. I figured the gesture would be clear enough. I knew, and I wasn't going to interfere. Weeks passed before I finally heard from him. One evening, my phone lit up with his name. His voice sounded normal, casual even. He didn't mention the box, didn't explain the silence, just asked how I'd been, like nothing had happened. I wanted to demand answers, but I didn't. Something in me understood that whatever he was working through, it wasn't for me to solve. We talked for 20 minutes about ordinary things, sports, work, the weather. When we hung up, I sat in the quiet and realized I wasn't angry anymore, just unsettled in a way that felt permanent, like I glimpsed a side of him I wasn't supposed to. Since then, I've carried the knowledge silently. Chris is still my brother, still the same in many ways, but I can't unknow what I found. I see him differently now, more complicated, more human, less of the carefree drifter I built in my head. I don't think I'll ever confront him about the letters. Some truths belong to the person who writes them, not the one who stumbles across them. And maybe that's what family really is sometimes, carrying the weight of what you discover, even when you can't say it out loud.